So I just wanted to make a couple announcements before we get started. I want to let you know that there are flyers for our upcoming gospel meeting on the table in the back. If you can think for some reason why you might be able to use one, post it at your job, in your neighborhood, hand it to somebody else. Certainly feel free to grab one. If we run out, we'll print some more. Then I also want to let you know Eric and Cindy have graciously invited all of us to go over to their house, which will be on the 29th, so it's still a ways away, but put it on your calendars, 29th at 5:30 to their house for dessert if you would like to get to know the Chandlers when they come into town. Yes. Yes. Okay. And if there's nothing else, then we'll have our opening prayer.
Please bear with me. Dear Lord, thank you for letting us come here tonight, Lord, with another opportunity to open your word, Lord, and be able to learn something. Please be with Marcus this week as he's going into surgery, Lord, and just thank you for bringing Mr. Jack and Miss Ann up here to be with us today and giving us the opportunity to spend time with them, Lord. And thank you for sending your son down to earth to die across our sins. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good evening. Get to plug the Wednesday night class. If you're not planning on being there, come and be with us. We're going to start Deuteronomy, except unless you don't want to work, because this will be a working class. We want you to read the first 4 chapters of Deuteronomy. We're going to dig into that. We're going to do some introduction. I'm going to be gone the next week. Rex, thank you. Rob, okay. The guy in the back there is going to take the next class, but we're not necessarily going to go verse by verse nor chapter by chapter. Deuteronomy is broken up into 3 speeches from Moses, and we may bounce back and forth, but at least to start with, you need to read the first 4 chapters. Then you get to read the rest if you want to. However, we have someone who is excelling and overperforming. He's told me this morning he's read all the way through chapter 12, so I have to keep up with him a little bit. It's good to have everybody here tonight. We shall assemble. We shall assemble on the mountain. We shall assemble at the throne. We shall I guess I got to do that, sorry. Presence. We bring an offering of song, glory and honor and dominion unto the Lamb, unto the King. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. We sing the song of the redeemed. And at the end of our journey, we shall bow down on bended knee, and with the angels up in heaven, we'll sing the song of victory. Glory and honor and dominion, and to the Lamb, unto the King. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. We sing the song of the redeemed. Amen.
Well, welcome back, everybody. And I think I scared some people away this morning when I said we're going to talk about the role of women. So, and someone said, "Are you going to give it to them?" I said, "Yeah, the men are really going to hear it tonight." So, no, glad you're here. I think there's a rumor someone really turned old today. 70 years old. It's their birthday. Initials are Rick Capelli. Oh, Are you that old? Pretty much. Well, congratulations. That's neat. Your daughter said, don't give him a bad time because he's getting old. And so she didn't say it that way. Yeah. Well, glad you're here. So,
Did everybody know that talk about heart attack, a guy from North Seattle,
Richard?
He did have a heart attack. And Christmas Day, he has a pacemaker. I didn't know that until we went to the singing.
Oh, he had it last Christmas. Oh, well, I didn't know. I think maybe I did hear that now I mentioned it. But he has a pacemaker. Wow. I have a live-in pacemaker. She just keeps me on pace. I tell you, it's really good. You know, and so speaking about that, we're about the role of women. So we're going to talk about things that in today's society will be really controversial because they seem archaic, sexist, misogynist, you know, everything you want to throw at it that has been said about Paul and his writings about women. We'll have to perhaps do a lesson sometime on really how Christ set women free and gave them the high value they deserve compared to the roles that they used to have before Christianity came along. And so, you know, it's interesting when you talk to your kids and you say, don't do that. And they say, well, can I have it? You go, no. And they go ahead and do it anyway. And you go, what is it about? What part of no did you not understand? And because when you say no, that's pretty simple. You know, you can't get that wrong. And so when they hear your instructions and they still just disregard it, it's not about the instructions. It's really an attitude towards the authority in their life. And in this case, when people see what God says and it's very, very clear, but they don't want anything to do with it, it's really not a rejection of the Bible. It's a rejection of God. No matter how hard it is, you know, or convenient or inconvenient, you know, if God says it, I'm going to align my will with him because somehow, for some reason, he knows best, whether I understand the wisdom of his commands or not. And so I say all that as preemptive to this discussion because, again, we know in 1 Timothy, Paul is writing about conduct. And I think it's a good memory verse in chapter 3, verse 15. But I want to come to you, but in case I'm delayed, I write so you might know how you ought to conduct yourself in the church of God or the household of God, which is the church of God, and in the pillar and the support of the truth. And so, you know, the discussion is, does the church hold up the truth? Well, of course it does, but it's our conduct as the church that holds up the truth, right? Because we are the church. It's not some secondary institution. We are the church. So our behavior is so important, and either we're going to glorify God by holding up the truth for the world to see, or we're going to water it down. So we saw in this morning's lesson, for the men, primarily he says what? Pray. Pray. You lead in a prayer. And it's interesting, when husbands especially aren't spiritual leaders, the wives have to step in and fill in the vacuum. And then sadly, that happens a lot. The women are stronger spiritually in the family than the men are. Now, not as a rule, but often you see that is the case. And they step in because there's a vacuum and they have to take charge. And so we set them up sometimes for the things we're going to talk about now. So let's read the text where he says, likewise women. And so likewise means I have roles for you as well, in as much that Paul is now speaking for God himself. So let's read verse 9 through 15, a short text, and we'll talk about it. Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly garments, but rather by means of good works, as befits women making a claim to godliness. Let a woman quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness, but I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over man, but to remain quiet. For it was Adam who was first created, and then Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman, being quite deceived, fell into transgression. But women shall be preserved through the bearing of children if they continue in the faith, in love and sanctity with self-restraint. All right, so when you read that, 6 verses, is there anything that when you read it, it just jumps out like, well, what does that mean? Or I'm not sure about that. Let's just pick some of those things out. Because when you're doing an inductive Bible study, that's often what you do is you write questions like, what does that word mean? What's that thought about? What do you mean this? And so then in your study, you try to answer those questions. So what are some of the things like caught your attention, you're not sure, or you want to know what it's all about? Anything in those sections.
Verse 12.
And what is specifically?
Do not permit women to teach or have authority.
Okay, what does that mean? That's a good thing. Very good, very important. All right, anything else?
Along those lines, what extent does remain quiet? How far does that go?
Okay, to remain quiet. Well, yeah, that's a good one. All right, anything else?
15.
And what in 15?
The idea of being the word saved,
Yeah.
being preserved or preserved.
Well, the King James said they're going to be saved through the bearing of children. Like, why do I have to have children go to heaven? Is that what it means? Okay, so that's a good question too. Are there some challenging things in this section? Certainly there is in there. What about proper clothing? Not with braided hair. Do we have any braided hair here? Because we're going to have to take you on if you do. All right. Or gold or pearls. I bet there's some golden pearls, all right, in any given audience. What does that mean? What's he talking about? So we look at these things, you can see there's challenges in there. So we'll try to break it down and look at it in a way that, that Paul intended for us to understand it. So again, likewise, just like I gave instruction to men, they got to lift up what kind of hands? Remember that? Holy hands. Your conduct matters. Don't you dare come to God if your hands have been involved in sin and impurity and then think you can pray to God and he's going to answer you. Holy hands. Well, likewise, I want women to adorn themselves. Now, adorn means what? What does your Bible say other than adorn? Did anybody have anything different? Did anyone say, excuse me, I got to go adorn myself this morning? Did anyone say that? You did? You look adorable after you've adorned yourself. What? Yeah, right. What does it mean? Dress yourself, clothe yourself, okay? So I want it with proper clothing, and then he says modestly and discreetly, at least the New American Standard, and then not with, and he'll list some things, but rather by means of, and what's that? Good works. That's interesting. If we're going to be talking about modest and appropriate behavior, it's not about outward clothing. The emphasis is going to be on good works. That's what you would be seen as addressed with. Like, here's a person that you see good works. That's what you see in them. They have a reputation for it, and they're known for it. And they're not known for their physical dress or their beautiful hair or their pearls or whatever they wear. They're known for their good works because that's more pleasing to God. So we'll talk about this, but remember, here's a pillar that supports the truth, and when it comes to women, what upholds the truth so much for the world to see, and it's so important, it's good works. And I appreciated the comment made sometime today about the ladies. I don't even know what it was, but they're always helping. Oh, you mentioned it. They're helping the elderly, and anything needs to be done, they're involved in it. Those are obviously good works. And if there was a vacuum of those ladies doing it, either things wouldn't get done at all, or someone else would have to step in and do them. So when we look at this thing, let's talk about it, where we are in society today. Because Jonathan Grant wrote this book about divine sex, and he says modern authenticity. Now, you've heard that's kind of a buzzword. You got to be authentic, true to yourself and who you are. But it encourages us, he says, to create our own beliefs and morality. The only rule being that we must resonate with who we feel we really are. Do you notice the emotion word? Feel who you are. And so that's the only important thing, that you resonate or identify, we'll use that word, with who you think you really are. The worst thing we can do is conform to some moral code that is imposed upon us from the outside. Let me just ask this. As a Christian, remember we studied about traditions handed down from God? Do we live under a moral code handed down to us? Yes. Absolutely, and it's for our well-being and for our good, and that's going to come out in your Deuteronomy study. He said, you obey these things for your survival. They're for your blessing. You'll be blessed if you do. But this is the world. You don't want to have society or parents or the church or whoever else imposing any kind of values on you. So in the middle of that paragraph, it's deemed to be self-evident that any such imposition would undermine our unique identity. The authentic self believes that personal meaning must be found within ourselves or must resonate with our one-of-a-kind personality. That describes the mantra that we hear so much about, being true to yourself today, and people following their own path. And that's created this confusion. It's an utter rejection of absolute morality, and you just got to define your own personal truths. And so another writer, the previous one was just exposing the fallacy of it, but this guy is a proponent. For years, Glenn Harrison, our spirits have been suffocated by restrictive traditions and morality. But now we must have the courage to follow our own light. We must resist anyone or anything that stands in our way. We must discover the hero inside ourselves and enter into that freedom that comes when we become who we really are. Now we're going to touch, that's not the purpose of our lesson to talk about the trans movement and all that, but do they refer to themselves as heroes for standing up who they really are and demanding that everyone accept them, whatever identity they choose? That's really the vocabulary we hear them using. It's interesting. Miss Brown Jackson was a nominee for the Supreme Court, was finally appointed. Maybe you caught this. She was asked in the nomination process, can you define a woman? Well, no, why is it important? Because you're going to make Supreme Court decisions about the role of men and women in society, and especially a lot of these gender issues. And you know what her answer was? I can't. And they said, you can't give a definition for a woman? You're going to sit on the Supreme Court? Said, I'm not a biologist. I can't tell you what a woman is. We go to New Zealand, and the prime minister there, he was newly elected, he refused to define what a woman was. And he says, arguing that people define themselves. Now, when the heads of state say, I can't or I won't, and let everyone else do that, do we have an issue? No wonder children are confused. Jesus said this. If you ask him, what is a woman? He gives you the answer. Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning created them male and female? Now, that's not just a Christian tradition, but that's what's been handed down for us from God. And from that is where we get our value system and our roles for men and women. So he created, we know in the beginning, man and female in his own image. So we all share the likeness of God. We're spiritual beings. And in that, we all have the same spiritual value to God. Interesting, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, when he's talking about women there, says, doesn't nature teach you? Now, it's interesting, talking to a lot of young people, they want to do what's natural and they want to save the earth, which is all good. I get environmental. Everything's about going back to nature, and well, doesn't nature teach you there are unique roles? I mean, you look at a bull elk and a cow elk, and there's nothing derogatory about calling a female cow a cow. That's just what they're called, right? But you look at them genetically, are they hugely different? And he has a harem of cows, and he'll fight off any spike bull or younger bull who's trying to take over his herd, and often they can fight even to the death. And until he gets older and not as strong, he will be the lead bull of that buck. I mean, you look at wildlife. I used to raise Chinese rooster pheasants for hunting, and they're just spectacularly colored. Only God could paint a bird like that, right? But you know which one's the male. Sorry, women. It's the beautiful one. And there's a reason for that. The female is more obscure because she's sitting on the nest and she has to be hiding in the brush, and you don't want her to attract attention, or else her youth would be vulnerable to predators. And so the male will be flashy and he'll run away from the nest and everyone will follow him. And that's true with ducks too. You know, I had to get ducks in here somehow, right? All right? The male is uniquely different. And that's a green-headed mallard. Doesn't nature teach you there's a difference between males and females? So it's interesting. We look at just the biology. This is not supposed to be a lesson on this whole trans issue, but it obviously relates, doesn't it? And sometimes we'll have to talk specifically more about it. But when you look about male and females, when an egg and a sperm, attach to each other, that's conception. And the only difference that makes between it being a male and a female is which chromosome gets there first, a Y or an X. And so females end up being XX chromosomes, and males have an X and Y. So genetically, they're different. Genetically. Do you understand that? From their very basic biology, before they develop any anatomical parts, they're genetically different on a chromosomal level. And so then their voice, males are always lower pitched, and then with female are higher. Why is that? Because they're genetically different. Weight, men are always heavier because of bone mass and muscle mass than women. Average man 190, women 163. Height, men are averaging 5'10", women are 5'4". That's why when you put bone mass and muscle mass and height, the best women college athletes cannot dunk a basketball. Now, some can, but generally in a game, you never ever see it. But men are doing it all the time. Does not nature teach you there's a difference between the genders? All right? How about fingers? Men's ring finger is longer than his index. Did you know that? And index and ring finger of the women are generally the same. Can you look at yours? Is that the case? All right. How about sex organs, hormones? Well, testosterone is 10 to 20 times in the man than it is in the woman. In the brain, 1,325 grams for the man, and the female slightly smaller. That doesn't make the man smarter, but they're just trying to show you they're uniquely and biologically different. Lifespan, who lives longer? Huh? The woman does, all right? So it's interesting. That's probably because when you go through a food line, men look like this, they pile it on, and women have a little more self-control. Men are idiots when it comes to taking risks. I mean, would you climb up on a ladder, hold up by a pole and a 2x4? Men will. Look at this guy. I don't know what happened. This is why men don't live as long as women. And this one I love, stupid, but this one's the greatest. He said, I'm going to trim my hedge. So he has a riding lawnmower and he's trimming his hedge. Like, are you guys crazy? Well, we are. All right? Well, what's going on? Here, which one do you think is a male brain and a female brain when they do brain specs or imaging? Notice the one on the blue is confined to each hemisphere, but the one with here, all the brain activity crosses over between both lobes. That's the female. In fact, when Dr. Amen did his brain specs, here's the female activity in the brain, here's the male. There's more brain activity in a female's brain. This is at rest. And we joke, Ann and I, because men have a nothing box they go into. What are you thinking about? Nothing. Like, what do you mean nothing? You got to be thinking about something, because women, all they do is think about something all the time, right? Is that true, women? Even when you go to bed, you're thinking about something. So I go, what are you thinking about? I go, nothing, it's you and your nothing box. I wish I had one. Well, it shows when they do imaging at rest, and men are going, duh. You know, that's probably because we don't think much and we get in trouble. So when we look at it, we're spiritually identical to God, but we're physically unique, aren't we? So let me just step aside and talk a little bit about some of the fallacies we're dealing with today that undermine the Christian tradition, the moral codes that are given to us by God, and especially roles for men and women. And I'm just going to give you a brief survey or understanding, because you've already heard all this, but the narrative today that is that gender is a social construct. And what do we mean by that, a social construct? Someone help me. Language is a social construct, they say. What does that mean?
Created by man.
And what do you mean by that?
We decided what we wanted
All right.
the language to be.
Okay, because every culture has different languages and idioms, and so it's a social construct, whatever serves them best. And so the argument is, just like language is created by men to serve them, when that's even challenged, you know, but gender identity is a social construct. And so when you're a female, you're given specific clothes and certain roles are expected of you, and we buy them dolls. If you're a girl and a Barbie doll, that's what you're supposed to look like. And we've created identity for females that have female biological sex. Now, they're going to say there's a difference between your biological sex and your gender. Gender is a social construct. It's something that society has imposed upon you. Biological sex are the organs you were born with. So then the next thing they will say that is biological sex does not determine gender. And this is where it gets confusing for us. Because if you look at someone and you hold them up, the doctor says, you have a girl, they'll give them a girl name and put on the birth certificate what? Female, because traditionally, and nature teaches us that when you have certain body parts or lack of them, it determines not just your biological sex, but your gender. They're saying, no, gender is a social construct, and so don't let people impose what gender you are. You can choose, and some hospitals now are saying you got to leave the birth certificate blank and let the child later decide what gender they are. That's really how far it's gone. Now, there's where we are. I just want to point out a couple of inconsistencies. So, because we have to start speaking out. Because it's being pushed upon us, right? In fact, we can have a reasonable discussion here about any kind of debated topic, and hopefully we can do it with love and truth and come to a consensus. But when you're talking to someone and you can't reason, but if you object or voice any kind of loving kind of, empirical argument that this doesn't hold, when the person gets mad and yells in your face and screams and yells obscenities, and they're not open to any discussion, that tells you one thing, doesn't it? What does it tell you, generally? They don't have an argument. Exactly right. And they know they don't have an argument, but they're trying to impose their values on you, and you have to accept it whether you like it or not, or else you're transphobic. So if you object to anything, you're already labeled as an outsider, a transphobic. You have, like homophobic, you're transphobic. You're afraid of trans people. So that's how they try to defeat the argument. Let's just think about a couple things. They're saying it's not a biological issue, right? Your biology does not determine your gender. Is that what you hear? Am I correct in that? You've all heard that? So how come then, when a male, a boy with biological male parts, when he later decides to identify as a female, and it has nothing to do with biology, right? Because that's what you're born with. Gender is a social construct. How come they have to have gender affirmation surgery? In other words, Gender has nothing to do with biology, but if I'm a male, you got to cut off my male parts and I got to get female hormones so I can develop breasts so I can look like a biological female. So on one hand, they tell you it has nothing to do with biological sex, but yet when they transition, they want to look like biologically the other person. And it goes the other way. When a woman wants to become a man, she can have a double mastectomy. They can artificially, through surgery, give her male organs. They don't work. And then she takes testosterone, and it causes all sorts of mental issues. In fact, that trans shooter that shot the children in Pennsylvania, she was transitioning when all this happened, taking male hormones. So again, if it has nothing to do with biological sex, why do you transition and you want to look like the biological alternative? It's inconsistent, isn't it? Here's the second thing. They're saying you got to be who you really are innately, what you were born with. You might have been born with male parts, but if you're a female inside, that's who you innately are. Now, we have a problem with that, and I'll suggest what it is. You should have a problem, because they're saying gender is a social construct. Is that something you're born with or that's imposed upon you?
Imposed upon you.
If you understand the language, social construct is something that's imposed upon you by society. And what did they say? You got to be true to your authentic self and let no one impose any church or family or tradition, anything on you.
Unless it's me.
Well, okay, but see, just stay with me. So if gender is something imposed, how can you claim I'm being true to my true self? I was born a female in a male body. Now you're claiming it's not a gender or a social construct. You're saying it's something you were actually born with. It's innate in who you are biologically. How can you have it both ways? It's a social construct, but I'm being true to who I really am innately. Well, I thought it was imposed upon you. See, it can't be both ways. It's ripe with problems. That's why they get so mad when they talk to you, because they don't have an answer to these things. And that's why the people in the movement, whether they're politicians or people in academia or the medical profession, refuse to define what a woman is. Because they have to define it in terms of biology, and they know that'll contradict everything they're saying. They won't. They just won't to do it. I didn't want to get off on this, but I just want you all to be comfortable who you are. God made you a male, and you're a male. And you have roles. And if you want to glorify God and have a successful life of joy and peace, understand your God-given roles as a male and exercise them. Same thing as a woman. God made you a woman. You have a purpose in the world only you can fulfill as a woman. Now, are there certain social constructs society does try to impose upon you? To be a woman, you got to be like Barbie. Is that wrong? That's wrong. We can reject that. To be a woman, you have to be promiscuous and flash your body to men to attract them. No, we can reject that because that doesn't come from God. That is from society, isn't it? Male, you got to be abusive and macho to women. No, that's wrong. That doesn't come from God, and that doesn't define a true male. So I understand there's some things that we have to reject, but God gives us roles, doesn't he? And to flourish as a Christian, we have to accept those roles. Well, first learn what they are, then accept them, then live them. Because we're all created in God's unique image. Notice what Paul says in Corinthians, neither is the woman without the man, nor the man without the woman in the Lord. We need desperately each other. So when you look at that, we're both equal, as John Piper says, in their godlike personhood, but also different in their roles, in manhood as also womanhood. But we're equal to God spiritually, but we have different roles when it comes to our physical life. All right, any comments or questions? Because that was my little lecture. All right. 1 Corinthians 6 says this, the food is for the stomach, but God will do, and stomach's for food, but God will do away with both of them. Your body's not for immorality, yet for the Lord, and the Lord is for the body. Why do we say that? Because whether male or female, I'm living for the Lord, to glorify him in what I do. And so we'll skip that one and go on. So when we look at this idea, there's a myth that is floated, and sometimes it permeates the church, that different roles between male and female implies different value. So if I can't do this like a man does, that means he's more important and I have less value to God. Maybe some of you have thought that. Maybe some of you think that about yourself right now, especially the women. Because Paul's going to say some very strong things in our society that come across as strong, and women say, well, I guess must be of less value to God. And how can we emphasize enough? Different roles, but equal value to God. That's a myth. It's a lie. And I know they're trying to say men can have babies, right, today? When it comes down to it, can men have babies? Can they really? No. That's something that uniquely only God has blessed women with. And not only they have the biology to have children, they've got the nurture and temperament to raise the children that men don't have. They're more mothering, and it's just genetically infused in them. And that's why the psalmist says, you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I am so valuable to God just as I am, whether it's male or female. So I want women to what? I want them to make a claim on godliness, is what Paul says. See that, the last part of that verse? Make a claim to godliness. I'm going to be a godly woman in God's eyes. So how do I do that? There's a beautiful not but clause in here. What's a not but clause? Someone help me, because we've talked about it, but you need to be familiar with it. What's a not but clause?
Not only.
Okay, not only.
Do this, but not that.
Now, that's kind of exclusive. Never this, but this. And it sounds that way, but it's more, correct yourself.
No. It's saying, don't do this, but this is what you can do. So it's, I don't know that it's black and white sometimes, because there's a lot that you can do as a woman.
Yes.
There are certain things you can't. So this is what I don't want you to do, but rather, I have this golden opportunity.
All right. Now, that's close, but we're going to refine that a little bit. Yes, Kevin.
Lesser to greater.
Okay.
It's less important for braided hair, but it's greater in regards to.
Okay, now we're getting closer to it. See the word not with, but rather. That's a not but. In other words, I don't want you to emphasize the outward, but more importantly, I want you to emphasize the inward. Because that's what's most beautiful. Yes?
You already say, because God focuses on the inner being of me, so my words inside should, when I'm good inside, it will portray my outward. People will notice.
That's good. So when I'm good on the inside, it'll shine on the outside, won't it? Yes. So is God saying you can't braid your hair? That you can't wear gold or pearls? No, but what if your only emphasis is braided hair and golden pearls, because people want to see how beautiful you are and they'll be attracted to you, just your external. You got a warped sense of your role as a woman. Yes, because inner beauty is more, because you can be beautiful from the outside, but ugly to the bone. Isn't that true? But you can be not as beautiful on the outside, but everyone will call, what a beautiful woman she is, because they see something that radiates from the inside. You make a claim to Gaudience, but actually you've dressed yourself with these good works, and people see it. Does that make sense? Not but means, yeah, this is okay, but emphasize this more importantly. The Bible's full of not but clauses, and you can't take them to be absolute. You're never going to braid your hair, and that's not what it's saying, okay? So when we look at this, adorn means, it comes from where we get cosmetics from, or cosmos. It means to put in order. Cosmetic means is to arrange your face. That's really what cosmetics are for, is to put your face in order. And that's what it comes from that Greek word. And so when you're dressing yourself, you're going to have modest clothes that are appropriate. They're not out of order. Now, often we think modest apparel is only in the sexual realm. So let's just start there. Can you be dressed sexually immodest? Yes. It's out of order when it draws undue attention to you in a sexual way. And we live in a society that is flaunted as appropriate, that you want to expose yourself as much as you can to get all the attention. So you could be sexually immodest, but the word doesn't mean sexually immodest. It means out of order anyway. So, for example, if a lady came in here and she was wearing a wedding gown with a 10-foot trail, and she had a veil on, and it was all not white but pink, and sat down here, would she be out of order? Okay, no, is she in order? No, she's trying to draw attention to herself for some reason, to make a scene or whatever. That's not appropriate or modest behavior or dress. Does that make sense? So it's not always sexually. It could be anything that's out of order. So if I preached in a tux that was pink and have a cumberland and all that, like, is that kind of out of order? Like, who are you, Jack? Who do you think you are? That could be out of order. That's what the word means, immodest. It's out of order, drawing undue attention to yourself. So I'm going to give you some pictures here in a second. And so modesty is the ability to show shame. Is that lost in society today? People don't have the ability to experience shame. It used to be that if something happened and you showed too much, you'd be embarrassed, right? But now they do it on purpose, both males and females. So we've lost the ability to have shame. But here is what is written in the first century. There's nothing a woman will not permit herself to do, nothing she deems shameful. She encircles her neck with green emeralds and fastens huge pearls to her elongated ears. So they were wearing such heavy jewelry that it made their earlobes long, right? And so numerous are the tears and stories piled one another. That's her hair. That she pays no attention to her own husband. So here's some pictures of plating in their day. And just these elaborate curls and plaiting and ropes tied in their hair. And you say, well, that looks beautiful, but the point he says, don't emphasize that to be attractive. Because what makes you attractive to God and to a good Christian man? It's your good works. It's the inner person. And so they would pile them on high. They would put fruit in their hair. They would do all sorts of things. When he says, don't braid your hair, don't emphasize that, he's saying it's okay, but don't make that, your goal. Back in their day, the prostitutes often described as having hair dressed in elaborate braids, their eyes with pencil lines, their eyebrows smothered in paint, their expensive clothes embroidered lavishly with flowers and bracelets and necklaces of gold jewels hanging all over her. I have to say this delicately. So my wife worked in the school system, and how many else work in the school system? High school. All right, well, you homeschool, right? But she said, the dress of girls there today were like prostitutes used to dress on the street. I mean, it's amazing. It's just to draw attention to themselves. And that's where our society is. Now, that's sexual immodesty. But that's what was going on their day. And the emphasis, again, is just not on the outward. It's got to be on the inward. So, not with, but rather. That's just not but clause, more importantly. I'll skip this one here. So, I want women to adorn themselves with good works. And that's how you make a claim to godliness. So, interesting. Remember when Samuel was picking out a king? Don't look at the appearance or the height of his stature, because I rejected him. For God does not see a man as a man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. All the real tale adds when it comes to clothing or cosmetics, it's all appeals to the outward appearance, doesn't it? No, is there anything wrong with looking your best? No. You want to look your best, but if that's all you emphasize, it's imbalanced because God looks at the heart, all right? So here's where it gets more challenging. A woman must quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness, and I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise over men, but to remain quiet. Let's look at some of the words we'll talk about. The word quiet means silence. Submissive means subjection. You rank yourself under. And then teach means exactly what it means, is to impart knowledge. You know, you're expressing knowledge from Scripture to others. You're teaching. And then authority means acting without submission or outside of submission. You're acting on your own authority. And it's interesting to teach, like right now I'm teaching. Do I have to be in charge of the class? And so you raise your hand, is it up to me to call on you, or can you just speak out? If people just start speaking out, we'd have an issue, right? The class would be out of control. We have to set some ground rules, right? But when you're teaching, am I exercising authority over the class? Yeah. So when I ask questions and you speak up, are you acting out of line or out of... No, you're acting within my authority when I ask questions and you ask for questions and you give one or an answer. So here, that's what we're talking about here. And so when we look at this, we have to make sense of it. And so how do we make sense of it? I do not allow a woman to teach. You know what it says? Let's look at it again, the text. I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority. These are tied together with the conjunction or. You're not allowed to teach when it requires you to exercise authority over male in a mixed audience. So that would be generally our collective worship. Because to teach or preach, you have to control the audience. You're in charge of what they're going to hear and how long and everything. You're in charge. Now, remember we started when we tell our children and they say, can I do this? And we say no, and they go ahead and do it anyway. And we ask, what was part about no that you not understand? Let me just ask you this question to ponder. If God wanted to say, I do not allow women to teach when it requires them to exercise authority over men, could he said it any clearer than this? I do not allow women to teach or exercise authority over men. Could he say it any clearer? I mean, how else would you put it? I'm really asking for input if you got an idea. It's like us telling our child, what part of no did you not understand? And God could be saying, what part of I do not allow a woman to teach did you not understand? Well, it can't mean that because that means, women can't do. That's right. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Women can't preach in a mixed congregation where there's men and women. That's the role of the males. Now, what's the question that should come up when we finally understand that? What should come up? What question should arise? If that's what you mean, Lord, what question should come up?
The reason behind it.
Why? That's fair, isn't it? Why? Now, before we look at the why, do you think the almighty wise God that's trying to, put order into the chaos of this society, do you think he has a good reason? A loving father, do you think he's just trying to put down one gender over the other? Or do you think he knows this is the best for society? Can we give him the benefit of the doubt whether we understand the reason or not? I just want you to start there. When God says no, he knows what's best. And we should be comfortable with that, but it's fair to ask why, isn't it? Now, Paul's going to get a reason, but the reasons are going to be hard to understand and actually simple at the same time. But any questions about this? So I've gone to a congregation when I was starting out, and I went over, it was the town before Wenatchee, what's it called? No, past Leavenworth. Cashmere. There was a little church there, and I filled in to preach, and there was like 10, 12 ladies said, well, we're glad you're here, but we don't have any men here. And so I had to lead the prayers, do the preaching, do the Lord's Supper, lead the song. I did it all. And as their conscience wouldn't allow them to do anything, and I was glad because they understood this, a tradition handed down from God. And so I did it all, and that doesn't happen very often. Now, I can't think of very many groups in the religious world that understand this and adhere to it. Because most every denominational group in the world allow in some form or manner women to take the role of preachers. So, and it's because, again, this is old-fashioned, misogynist, and sexist, and all that. That's the claim they make against Paul. That when you're making against Paul, who are really you making a claim against? God. So, when we make sense of this, women certainly can teach. There's all sorts of examples. Titus, the older women are supposed to teach the younger. We see in Acts that Aquila and Priscilla took Apollos aside and taught him the way of the Lord more accurately. He said husband and wife, but it wasn't a public setting with a mixed audience. It was just they were doing teaching. Women do some of the most profound and the best teaching there is. But there are certain arenas or events, like in a worship assembly, when there's men and women, Paul says, no. It doesn't mean they can't, but when they have to exercise authority over men by virtue of teaching. And interesting, in the Old Testament, there's no women kings, no women priests. Deborah was called a prophetess. Huldah was called a prophetess. Noadiah is called a prophetess. What do prophets do?
Reveal the truth.
They teach. They teach. But you go to them, what does the Lord say? They give an answer. But were they teaching in this kind of form? No. In this kind of environment. But did they teach? Absolutely. So I want you to have some balance on this. It doesn't say women can't teach. It means they can teach when they end up exercising authority over men. In other words, it has to be kind of a mixed audience where the men should be doing that role. So when we look at it, there's two reasons given. For, when you see the word for in verse 13, what does that mean? So Paul's now going to explain why God has given this rule. Now, this isn't too hard to understand. Who was created first? Man, the male. And then it was Eve. So we look at genetically, we saw those pictures. Who runs the bullock? What do you call that? His harem. I'm looking. That's not a good word in society, but it's called a harem, isn't it? It's a harem. He runs it. Why? Because he is the male. Doesn't nature teach you? And we see that across the board in nature. And God said it's the same way with humans. When I created you in the image, I created man first, and woman was made as a second as a helpmeet. So he gets the leadership role, but he gets the responsibility and the accountability. And it's going to come down on him. So second of all, what does it say? Verse 14. What's the second reason? Someone pointed out. All right. Now, this is kind of tricky because was Adam, did he sin too? But when God asked Adam, said, is it true? Did you eat of this? He said, well, the woman who you gave me the food and I ate. That's not a very good excuse, to be honest. But when he asked the woman, what did she say? The serpent deceived me. She was lied to. And I'm not saying it's because she was gullible more so than the husband, because the Lord doesn't say that. He just says, you were deceived, and part of the consequence is now the leadership role goes to the male. It's not a punishment. It's not because you're not able to lead, but because you were deceived, it's going to go to the male. I mean, that's all you can make out of this, right? Because it says, who was created first? The man. That's the first reason. The second reason is what? Because the woman is deceived. So it's going to the man. And you say, well, I don't understand that. And I said, that's the best I can give you. And that's God's reason, right? It's true in nature. It should be true about the human race as well. So it's the order of creation, and it has to do with the one deceived. Now, this is the most challenging one. Oh, you want to see this one? We have time, might as well. Traffic violations. Who is it? Oh, that's men. Driving, drunk driving, belt violation, speeding. Doesn't mean we're always the most self-controlled. Violent crime, men. Property crime, men. But yet, when it comes to why these roles, it's just because that's what God said. With his good wisdom. So, the woman's going to be a help meter, and she was made for man. But make sure order, purpose, and role does not minimize one's value. How many times do I have to say that? The order of creation, the purpose of your role and your role, it doesn't minimize who you are. Remember in 1 Peter 3, God says, live with your wife in an understanding way, according to knowledge, and grant her honor as a fellow heir in the kingdom of God. Equals. And if you can't do that in your marriage, she's your equal, your prayers won't even get out through the roof. Your prayers will be hindered. God won't listen to you if you don't grant her equal honor as equal value in God's kingdom. So that word companion was used in the Psalms. That's what she is. It's a helpmeet, a companion. When it says our soul waits for the Lord, he is our help and our shield. The psalmist says, God, you are my help and my deliverer. The same word used about God is used for the woman who is given to the man as a helper. And can we do without God? Absolutely not. Can a husband flourish as God intended without a good wife? No. It's designed perfectly. But someone has to lead. That's the way it is. And so we look at it. There are the reasons, and I'm not going to spend more time on that because we talked about it real quickly. But notice what it does say in this. Back in the book of Genesis, talking to the woman, because you have listened to the man, to the voice of your wife, and eaten from the tree about which I commanded, you shall not eat from it. Cursed is the ground. Now he has to work. But what was his problem? You listened to who? The voice of your wife. What should he have done? Listen to the voice. Has God already told Adam directly, do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? So that's your problem. You didn't listen to me. And there's where the problem has happened even to this day. So we won't talk about that, but here's the most challenging one. I think, who mentioned this one? Was it you? What does it mean they'll be preserved for the bearing of children? Oh, it was Kevin, yeah. It says women will be saved through the bearing of children. This is challenging because it seems kind of cryptic that if I want to be saved, I got to bear children. And then not only that, my children got to continue in faith and love. Now, on the surface, it looks that way, but I'm going to tell you that's not what it means. All right? But what we see in here, what do we see in here but a role? A role. Can men give birth to children? No, I don't care what society tells you. And when our government appoints the head of the Health and Humans, and it's a man who 60 years has been a man, and now he decides to be a woman, and now he's appointed to this office. It's delusional. We have to talk about there's something mentally wrong. And that's going to create a lot of havoc when people hear you say that, but that's what it is. Something is wrong mentally. When all of a sudden at age 60, now you're 70, so I'm going to put on pantyhose and start dressing like a woman. Something is wrong. Because there's roles for men and there's roles for women. And men can't have babies, only women can. He says, enjoy and fulfill your role. And this is an overarching picture of the role of women. Because some women don't get married, some women are barren, they can have children. But he's talking overall, here's what I want to see women doing. What? Bearing children, Christian children. Because you're the only ones that can do it, and God designed you so perfectly to nurture them, where women are typically softer than the men, and they give more attention. And I watch my wife interact with my kids the way different than I do. She still calls our 40-year-old boy Curtsy. And I can't call him Curtsy. He would just, Dad. Isn't that true? And he adores it coming from his mom. And that's what it means. Just have children. Continue in faith and love and sanctity with self-restraint. Control yourself. And so, I'm not even going to read that because we're out of time. But there's what that means. It's a role. And now we're out of time. But women will be preserved through the bearing of children. If they, who's the they? That would be both the children, perhaps the mother itself. All right. Was this challenging, this class, or it's just hard to swallow sometimes? Any feedback, pushback, comments? Are we all going to say amen then? All right. Does this fly in the face of society, though? Yeah.
Of course it does.
Yeah. And Christianity and Christ always has, right? Yeah. Yes, Randy.
Do you foresee issues in the future if the society keeps going the way it is? You've got transgender people in the church. You get like a transgender man, a woman who's now a man that wants to teach
Yes.
Bible classes. I mean, it's going to be.
Yes, I see problems.
Yeah.
Regardless if we have a right to exercise religious freedom or not. In Oregon, I was just reading, there's new laws that when it comes to adopting kids in Oregon, that you have to go through some trans training to be, sensitive to that. And then you have to agree that you're going to call your children by their preferred pronouns. And this Christian woman, who are the best people to adopt Christian or kids? But Christian parents, to give them a nurturing and wonderful and caring family. And they said, if you're not going to agree to these terms, you're not eligible to adopt anymore. Now, the Oregon's being sued by the National Alliance, whatever it's called, but they're being sued, and we'll see if they win or not, because it's, they're trying to get people to defy their conscience, their religious values. But there's coming a place in America that isn't even going to matter anymore. So if it's going to happen on that level, it's just a matter of time till it comes here. All right? So that's a good question. It's scary, but we have to speak out, because maybe there'll be a tipping point where enough people say, this is crazy. This is stupid. And some people, physicians and psychologists, I have a lot of material that they're saying, this is getting out of hand. It's crazy talk. But we got to get enough people to say it before it pushes back and tips the balance the other way. Yeah, Steve.
Well, in view of what we studied this morning, in respect to the leaders and so on, I'm thinking, how do you coordinate this? And I hate to use the word protest as Christians, but without overstepping your bounds. In other words, many of us,
Yeah.
feel like that we should just remain quiet and live a good, quiet Christian life.
Right.
But then I hear you say,
Yeah.
Maybe we need to step out there.
That's a good question. So my suggestion is always obey the government when it doesn't cause you to disobey God, right? That's the rule from God. But when it comes to letting your voice be heard, if you want to protest, fine. But I think the way you protest is when people say something and it's given a proper environment with family or friends or work. So no, I think that's crazy. I'm sorry. A woman is a woman, a man's a man. And that's how we speak out in those things, because we're so intimidated not to say anything. Do you feel intimidated? Honest, do you? Not to say anything? You're going to be called transphobic or something, or homophobic? No, just speak out lovingly and kind, and you'll probably get a negative response, but that's okay. Because when too many people are scared to say anything, that's when they have the voice. They monopolize the voice, the narrative.
Not going to be popular.
No, but we're not popular. They killed Jesus over this because he wasn't, he didn't follow the narrative. So, but that's a good question. Don't be mean. And I was talking to a father, and he just, Jack, can I tell you, it's 1 a.m. because we've been talking, so I just got to ask you. But he has a family relative that is living the homosexual lifestyle. Is there any way you're born that way? He's looking for excuse to find acceptance for him. And he said, that's a great question. All my studies, there's no definitive evidence that you're born with it. So even though they claim it, and maybe environmentally, because there's so much testosterone or estrogen in our food supplies that it's infecting people genetically. But usually, most of the time, it's trauma and sexual assaults in their life. And he goes, he was assaulted by a family member. And I would suggest most of these people that are having these problems have had trauma in their life. I mean, when you tell your daughters, man, I wish you were a boy. I didn't want a girl. I wanted a boy. Is that going to affect her mentally and psychologically when she grows up? And then she lives in a society that says you can switch gender. She goes, I'm going to be the boy that dad always wanted. And you know where the suicide rate is the highest? It's among trans children. And you say, well, it's because you don't accept them. No, it's because they're confused. They're messed up mentally. They need help. Used to call it gender dysphoria. It was a psychological condition. Right.
I understand many of these young women have had an abusive father, abusive
Yes.
mother, and it's led to this.
There's usually a familial background that it can lead to a lot of this. Yeah. Not always, because I'm no expert in it, but I'm just telling you what I've read and seen and anecdotally. Yeah. Anything else? Are we done taping?